What's poppin' YouTube? Zach Lesage here. We're going to be covering over the top 10 best Phantasmal Flames decks in our format. Now, we've seen the metagame become a little bit stale when it comes down to how decks have kind of played out. There haven't been any majors over the holidays, but that's about to change with Toronto and Merida regionals happening in the next few weeks. Now, the top decks are pretty much unchanged. We have the Gholdengo, Charizard, Gardevoir, and Dragapult variants that are all vying for that top spot in the format. But there have been some splashes here and there of changes in deck lists and some decks entering in and out of the top 10 metagame overall. We're going to be covering all of these decks, including the deck lists, and you can get these deck lists available in the pinned comment. You can copy and paste them right into PTCG Live. If that sounds like a plan, give this video a like, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know a deck that you're rocking with right now to help boost the YouTube algorithm. At number 10, we have Joltik Box. Now, Joltik Box, again, is going to be my personal choice for this list. This list is usually a combination of online event results, major tournament results, and of course, my testing in real life at League Cups, League Challenges, and Locals. Now, Joltik Box might not necessarily fall into the top 10 when it comes to play rate. This deck is probably going to be in the top 20 or so decks when it comes down to it. Where I think this deck really excels is that Pikachu EX is still incredibly strong at knocking out Pokemon like Gholdengo, knocking out Pokemon that are just two prizers in general. And while it might not do well against the Mega Pokemon, there's very few relevant Mega Pokemon. And if you do run into those, Mega Mawile can help you get there towards the end of the game. So a lot of the games you're either going to be going with an Iron Hands and or a Pikachu strategy, using Jolting Charge, powering up those Pokemon, and powering through your opponent's Pokemon. If your opponent doesn't necessarily know how to play the Gholdengo versus Joltik matchup, which I'm sure many people have not tested at this point, they might be a little bit rusty on that. You could probably just run through some of those matchups, and with Erica's Invitation, you can almost always grab those last two prize cards because your opponent doesn't have a way to adjust their hand, so you can go ahead and Erica's Invitation, bring up that Pheasantipity or Genesect EX or Mew EX or whatever your opponent might be playing, and then Blood Moon them or have any other way to knock out your opponent's Pokemon. I think this list is pretty close to being perfect, and it's a deck that I've been kind of holding on to. I always have built at all times because I'm always ready to play it. But that's really what's going to kick off our list. There could be a lot of other decks that could be in 10. There's a few decks that slipped. So I think these bottom like 3-4 spots are all really up to the eye of the beholder. So keep that in mind as we kind of go through this list. But let's see what we got kicking off at number 9. Popping into number 9 this week is going to be Alakazam. Now, Alakazam is one of those decks that I kind of have a hunch that could see some success at Toronto or Merida. Now, I don't want to be spoon-feeding, actually pun intended, any of this information to anyone. But like looking at the metagame, Gholdengo is the number 1 meta share deck, and it's the top choice for many, including myself, going into Toronto and Merida regionals. Now, there's not too many decks that actually counter Gholdengo well. You might be thinking that you could be playing Charizard Noctowl, how it did well at that regionals in Germany. It's not really seeing the same success that it did once against Gholdengo, because that surprise factor's there. Alakazam does pretty well against Gholdengo. And I hate to be like, look, if you could just be the best deck or a couple of the top decks, you could be good. But that's really where it is when we're in this kind of square format of 4 decks, and then every other deck revolves around those decks. Being able to draw through your deck and hitting for a large, powerful hand does give you a lot of opportunities to kind of rock through these tough matchups like Gholdengo that would otherwise beat most of the other decks in the format. If this deck were to have a day 2 run where it does well, and then it hits enough Gholdengos day 2, it could run into a format where it runs into enough Gholdengos in top 8, where I think Alakazam could win. Now, maybe this is just cope, maybe this is just crazy Zach talking, but I think Alakazam is a very real deck, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a deck like this have a deeper run than usually expected as the formats become a little bit stale. If it doesn't happen, that's fine. That's just my hunch, but that's the reason why it's at number 9. Also, with cards like Battle Cage and Psyduck, it doesn't necessarily have the worst Dragapult matchup. After testing it a little bit more, I think it's pretty good, actually. Not like good in the sense of where like you're always winning, but it's competitive enough where it's not an auto loss as many expect it is. Terra Box seems to be a deck that's falling off a little bit this week, and I'm just not sure if it's through like how I'm feeling or overall as the deck's not really seeing as much success. I think that Terra Box is an interesting choice for the metagame. It certainly has answers for everything, but when you have a deck that's kind of held together with super glue and tape, obviously there's going to be some issues that could arise. Now, you're playing a very thin line of the EVs when it comes to this deck. Going to go with Josh Frinkslis from LAIC. Nothing's really changed here, and I think I've maybe adjusted a card or two. However, if you prize the Flareon into the Gholdengo matchup, it could be tough. When you're playing against Gholdengo nowadays, Gholdengo also has the Technical Machine Evolution, so they're not necessarily as susceptible to Torrential Pump as they were before. Now, it's not always a Gholdengo world. I think that you could definitely knock out some routes with Torrential Pump easily. I think that you could run into a Grimmsnarl deck and do well with Leafeon. There's just a lot of things where I feel like a lot of the grass weak dark Pokemon are not seeing as much success. Flareon seems to be an only tech for the Gholdengo matchup. Gholdengo is really a deck that can kind of get through with the Wellspring Ogerpon. Sure, other decks aren't really running Shaman, but we are seeing Gardevoir switch back to Technical Machine Evolution. Maybe that helps them a little bit get around Wellspring. Maybe it doesn't. I mean, they don't really have a way to get through that matchup. However, with Jellicent, they could just evolve into Jellicent and really shut this deck off a little bit. So you're not able to use Sparkling Crystal or Energy Switch. So I think it's one of those things where Terra Box is kind of in a confused state in the metagame. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's great. I think it's just one of the top 10 decks that exists. And similar to Joltik and Alakazam, this deck easily could have been Marnie's. This deck easily could have been Raging Bolt. Those decks just aren't really cutting it for the top 10 this week, but they could cut it for the top 10 next week as we approach towards Toronto. So if you're a Terra Box believer, 100% prove it, send it to Toronto, send it to Merida. I think that we're seeing a few other players who've been playing this deck fall off this deck a little bit. At number 7, we have one of the newcomer decks from Phantasmal Flames, and largely it has to do with the ice cream card, Jumbo Ice Cream, that I feel kind of made this deck a little bit better than it once was before. We have Kangaskhan Bouffalant. Now, there have been some noticeable changes from this deck over the past couple weeks, and players have decided to cut one of the Bouffalant for one of the other Bouffalant. I think it's from Obsidian Flames, and that's just so that Bouffalant has a little bit of an extra edge when it comes to Curly Wall. So if you ever have to wall something a little bit, it's slightly better than the other Bouffalant. Other than that, there's been very few changes when it comes to this deck. However, the reason why it's ranked a little bit lower than it might be seeing success online with is that Gholdengo decks have been playing Mega Lopunny. I hate to always bring it back to Gholdengo, but we have to bring it back to the top 4-ish deck somehow. This deck is close against most of the other decks. Like, I don't necessarily think that Donzard's going to have the greatest matchup here, but maybe it could do okay against Cornerstone to some degree. But Dragapult could struggle a little bit with the Monkey Dory. Gardevoir has a pretty favored matchup. It's close, but I think it's slightly favored for Gardevoir. And of course, Gholdengo has a very favorable matchup. So if you're losing against Gholdengo, one of the top decks, if not the top deck, one of the ways that this could happen. You're going to be using Technical Machine, Turbo Energize, powering up energies on either your Mega Kangaskhan or your Cornerstone, and really just trying to tank. If you're able to kind of get around these OHKO measures of other decks, then you're probably in the chill range where you're able to Ice Cream, Penny, all that stuff. If your opponent's Pokemon can OHKO you, you're probably in severe danger. Deck's pretty powerful when it works. I think it's a great deck to kind of crush out locals. However, if the metagame is anything what it currently is towards Toronto and Merida regionals, I do think Kanga Boof could struggle a little bit. However, I do think it is slightly better than the other decks that we've already seen so far when it comes to metagame placement. At the halfway mark of our list, we have Mega Absol EX Box. Now, this is a deck that we saw Tord Reklev, arguably the best player in the game, crush the Mega Evolution format with. He invented this deck, took it to the regionals, and did very well with it. Now, the deck revolves around using either Monkey Dory to place damage counters from your Pokemon onto your opponent's Pokemon and use Terminal Period, or you can kind of use the deck as a disruption-based deck by using Iono, and ripping your opponent's hand with Claw of Darkness to take out key cards. If we look towards how this deck has changed going forward, it went from a straight up build to adding in Moltres to try to deal with Gholdengo, which ended up being a little bit of a cope. And then we see that Toadscruel has been added to this deck. Daichi Shimeda, top Japanese players, kind of been messing around with this list, and it's been making some waves online. Toadscruel Slime Mold Colony does block your opponent from getting back cards from the discard pile, which could be really good against the Gholdengo matchup or against cards like Night Stretcher. So giving yourself a little bit more opportunities, and maybe you could rip some of the other cards out of your opponent's hand that might allow them to get around Slime Mold Colony. I think that this build of the deck does give us a little bit more hope against the top decks in the format. So it does bump this deck up from where otherwise I think it'd be in the lower top 10 to kind of breathing some life back into this deck and putting it towards the middle of the list. I could see this deck seeing a little bit more success towards Toronto Regionals, and I do think that Toadscruel is going to be a hot tech in general. Whenever one particular deck, like Gholdengo, gets towards the top long enough, players will start hard teching for that said deck, and that's where we're going to see cards like Toadscruel pop up a little bit more. Speaking about Toadscruel, we see another deck that plays Toadscruel at number 5, and that's going to be N-Zoroark EX. So we just talked about Tord Reklev, but let's talk about Liam Halliburton, the player that actually lost to Tord at that regional championship finalist. He was playing N-Zoroark EX, and I think N-Zoroark EX is one of those decks that is misunderstood in this metagame. It's not always the best deck, but when the deck does well, the deck does have a lot of opportunities to see success. Now, Liam lost to Tord because of Cornerstone Ogre-Pawn that was being played in that Mega Absol deck. Not really any way other than Liam playing Blood Moon and Team Rocket's Watchtower. Now, Mega Lopunny does solve that issue. For Cornerstone-based matchups, we do have Toadscruel that does solve some of the Gholdengo issues. You are a Dark type, so you do well against Gardevoir to some degree. And of course, with Double Monkey Dory and being able to do extra damage with Reshiram's attack based off how many damage counters you have on you, you could really do well against Dragapult as well. This deck might actually end up having the strongest matchup against the top 4 without being a top 4 deck. Hence the reason why this deck is going to be at number 5. And for anything else in the format, most abilities are coming from colorless Pokemon, so Team Rocket's Watchtower can shut down a significant portion of the metagame. I think that N-Zoroark EX, a build like this, might be a deck to watch out for as we approach the top of the metagame, and we'll have to see exactly how Toadscruel is able to see success. The one thing about Toadscruel is Toadscruel can get countered by Mega Lopunny itself, and Mega Lopunny can do some decent numbers, so between using Mega Lopunny and Professor Turo, some decks might be able to get around Toadscruel. However, it's always going to be, we'll find out during the game. And I think at least the Toadscruel Mega Lopunny additions to this deck really do add an element of surprise. Breaking into the top 4, and I think these are like the definitive top 4 decks of the format. So if you're approaching any kind of locals, League Challenge, League Cup, major event, I think you're going to expect these. We have Charizard, Noctowl, Pidgeot, Dusknoir, otherwise known as Terrazard, otherwise known as Donzard. Dawn, the new card from Phantasmal Flames, has allowed us to be able to search out multiple pieces, which allows this crazy combo deck to work out. You can get off those early fan Rotoms, search out Hoot Hoot, Pidgey, and Noctowl. You can use something like Nest Ball, search out a Terrapagos, and then you're able to go rare candy this, rare candy that. Of course, with the missing pieces, you need Charmanders and stuff like that. The list has remained relatively unchanged since the deck saw success at regionals in Germany. I personally decided to cut the 80 HP Charmander because it was not Buddy pofnable. And if I don't have Pidgeot out, I'm just going to have to choose a better Pokemon if my Pokemon get knocked out in the active. Cut down the Pidgeot line a little bit more to give ourselves some more space for cards like Jacques. And the A-Spec has changed to Unfair Stamp because we already have enough ways to bring up our opponent's Pokemon with Boss's Orders and Counter Catcher. And this deck is basically, that's really where the changes have happened. Now, where this deck is starting to fall down a little bit is like any new deck. When a deck does really well, players, learn how to play against that deck. I don't think a lot of players knew how to play against this particular build of Charizard going into that regionals. We've since understood, and it's become a mainstay part of the metagame. Players now understand what they're dealing with, have come up with successful strategies, and some of them work, some of them don't. However, it kind of correctly places this deck at number 4, where Charizard usually kind of ends up sticking out there. Now, I could see this deck seeing success again in the future. I think it's a very great choice, no matter when you're playing it. And if anything, it's brought some other decks that we have in the top 4 back into the top 4. So Charizard, Donzard, really, really great deck. At number 3, we have Dragapult EX with Dusknoir. Now, Pult Noir has been one of those long-staying decks in our metagame, and it's one of the reasons why our metagame's been a little bit stale. Since post-rotation, this deck has absolutely been dominating the game to the point where it did come second at the World Championships. I mean, I think we look at a lot of these decks in the top 4, and they've all done very well at this recent Worlds, maybe the Worlds prior to that, regionals, etc., etc. Now, our whole goal with this deck is to use Badoo, Itchy Paw, and our opponent out of items early on in the game, while we set up things like Dragapult and set up Dusknoir to kind of pop up for opponent's Pokemon, using Phantom Dive to control how we knock out our opponent's Pokemon works in tandem with Curse Blast. And of course, we can adjust our opponent's prize cards with Iono, and we can also activate our own counter catches with that. Now, one thing that's changed recently with this deck is a lot of people have been saying Monkey Dory is on fraud alert, and a lot of players are cutting it for Moltres. Now, you'll see some players add in Defiance Band, and that's really to go Moltres plus Defiance Band, knocking out a Gholdengo for a singular energy. However, you can also get that knockout with Dusclops, and there's no way to search out Defiance Band, so I decided to just go with Moltres to give ourselves a little bit better chance against Gholdengo, but nothing perfect. You could also use one of your 3 Night Stretchers to get it back over and over again, so you always have that OHKO measure, and you don't even have to worry about playing a Dragapult EX deck. You could be playing Dusknoir, Dusclops with Moltres. No single prize cards necessary, using Dracloak's Recon Directive to kind of draw through cards. So that's going to be one of the new exciting changes to this deck. There might be other changes that we could see. However, I think as many decks are being playing Toadstool, this deck might actually end up becoming a little bit better because you are able to kind of get around some of those decks that are playing Toadstool. Now, it might not always have the best matchups. However, we could see Dragapult go up a spot in the metagame, where a deck like Gholdengo could go down a spot in the upcoming weeks. At number 2, we have straight up Gardevoir. Now, it's one of the bigger changes that we've seen on this list. Jellicent Gardevoir seems to be falling down a little bit when it comes to the metagame share. Enough decks are kind of able to get around it nowadays, and that gives us the opportunity to just go straight up with Gardevoir, be a little bit more consistent instead of having Rare Candy Gardevoir and losing to Dragapult Dusknoir because you're only running with a 2-1-2 line of Gardevoir. We still have rare candies, but we've gone back to Technical Machine Evolution, so you have ways to evolve into those Curlies and be a little bit more consistent. This is from the Gardevoir Brain, Henry Chow. I think we've seen enough of these lists where Lux Cape does allow us to hit some bigger numbers when it comes to Screamtail. We also have cool Frillish plays. Really, that's going to be the only change that we've seen from this build. Of course, we're not going to be running the Jellicent EX. I do have a Jellicent EX build available in my Discord, so if you want to kind of check out all the lists a little bit earlier than these top 10 decks, be sure to subscribe to my Metafy group, and you get access to the Discord lists. Other than that, yeah, Gardevoir, Psychic Embracing, powering up various Pokemon. We have less Pokemon to attack with when it comes to this build. However, we still have all the Monkey Dories. We have all the key Pokemon that are necessary. You don't really have Mega Diancie, but you don't necessarily need Mega Diancie when you have access to Lux Cape with some of these attackers that we have in play. So I think Gardevoir is going to continue to see success. The players that are very good at Gardevoir are probably going to continue to play Gardevoir. And the players who are very good at other decks in the top 4 are probably going to be playing other decks. Of course, you're going to have some players that are going to be going outside of the top 4 decks into those dark range territories, or maybe Kangaskhan, Bouffalant. I mean, any of these top 10 decks are viable, and I'm sure that there's going to be another 5 or so decks that are pretty viable too. Outside of that range, yeah, it's one of those things where hopefully wish for the best, prove me wrong. But this is not our number 1 deck of the week. We can only have one number 1 deck of the week, and that deck is Gholdengo. Now, Gholdengo with Lunatone has really popped off. I think we saw how this deck went at the World Championships. We gained Genesect, the deck changed up, And now, since we've gained Lunatone, the deck's kind of reached its final form. In Phantasmal Flames, we gained Mega Lopunny EX, which does give us an additional attacker for this deck, especially when we do not have opportunities to rip through our energies, which could be great against Jellicent EX or against Toadstool or any of those other Pokemon. It also is an answer that goes through Crustle, Cornerstone, or any other kind of the safeguard Pokemon with either its first attack that can knock out a Cornerstone or its second attack that can knock out a Crustle. Hops Cramorant does give us an opportunity for those very exciting and fun and interactive Soul Rock battles, giving yourself as you go with a single prize card board and knock them out. And of course, we've cut down a Gholdengo EX because the deck's become less of a Gholdengo deck and more of a Soul Rock Mega Lopunny deck in a lot of ways, with coin bonus being for draw and making it rain being an afterthought in some matchups. Not really much else has changed. We have Technical Machine Evolution, so you could have a way to search out your Mega Lopunny or Gholdengo in right matchups like Terra Box or any of those Cornerstone or Crustle decks mentioned. We also have access here to an Ultra Ball to search out our Gholdengo or our Mega Lopunny if we don't necessarily have access to a Genesect. Minor changes. We're still kind of going through and playing on a matchup by matchup basis. I think that this is a deck that does change up how it plays quite differently in each individual matchup. I played at a local tournament this past week where I went 3-1. Playing between a Crustle deck and playing between a Gardevoir deck is going to be two completely different experiences, where it's one, you turn yourself into a Mega Lopunny Soul Rock Cramorant deck, and the other one, you might be just beginning attacking with Gholdengo. So some really interesting gameplay can be found with Gholdengo in an otherwise stale metagame. And I truly believe that this is one of the decks that has the most resilient matchup spread in the game. However, if we look towards the metagame, it is creeping upon Gholdengo, so I could see this deck falling off of the top one spot as we approach something like Toronto. Like I said earlier in this video, something like Alakazam could end up just taking this deck out of Toronto or Merida and crowning itself the champion. And I think that's what makes Pokemon so cool, is that it is a little bit more matchup based. So if you do pick the right deck, you could have a deep run. Now, that's not saying play a bunch of Alakazam, because you might run into some other issues when it comes to that deck, like any deck that's playing Iono, but since this deck doesn't, it could definitely struggle to that matchup. Now, that's what we got going on for our top 10 decks. I did say already we have the decks in the pinned comment, so you can go ahead, click on those Limitless links, and then you could import, export, whatever you want to do to PTCG Live there, choose your preferred art, whatever. Other than that, if you need any of those cards, check out our sponsors at Kayfabe Cards. They're also going to be at Toronto Regionals as one of the featured merchants there. So if you need any cards, check out their site. You could also do in-store pickup orders and then place them for Toronto orders. I think that's before the 10th. So be sure to check that out. We also have our sponsors at PTCGL store. So if you need any PTCG Live codes, you could use our codes available in the description to save on those. You could build whatever decks you need. If you need any more credits, that's a great way to do it. We are also sponsored by Element Sleeves here at the Shuffle Squad. So that's one of our new projects that we've been working on. They're the only sleeves that I've been using at regionals. They've been absolutely fantastic. I've basically been playing the same Gholdengo deck at locals now for almost a month, and I have not had to open a new pack of sleeves, so they've really been holding together well. Yeah, sure, I might have to change a split sleeve here or there, but that's going to be with any sleeve brand. We're there to protect the cards, so you can use code LaSage at elementsleeves.com. As for me, I've truly been enjoying the game a lot. I've taken a bit of a break in December to kind of focus on myself. I've been kind of going through my mental health journey, and after being on new meds for over the past month now, I feel like things have kind of settled in. I'm feeling more like myself, and things are going great. But that's also had a great effect to me on Pokemon and my outlook at content creation. So I've been going to locals a little bit more, hanging out with my friends, playing more Pokemon in a casual setting, inviting more friends over for playtesting. So it hasn't necessarily been as serious where I'd only really like to play Pokemon during coaching or during major tournaments. But now I've just kind of been really enjoying the game, enjoying our community a little bit more. And I'm still playing at major events for sure. I'm going to Toronto Regionals, Merida Regionals, EUIC, and I should be at Seattle. But we'll have to see how that goes Nonetheless, I do appreciate every single person for watching this video. I'm going to be posting up a little bit more content. And like I said on social media, I'm going to be doing these top 10 base decks. Probably going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, depending on the when I'm able to get these videos up. So switching that from Friday, where I'd kind of post the decks going into the weekend, I kind of want players to have the opportunity to look at these lists and adjust their list for the upcoming week. So that gives them an opportunity to play these at their Friday locals, their Saturday League Cups, majors, etc. So hopefully that change is great for y'all. And yeah, if you haven't already, give this video a like. Let us know in the comments what events you're playing in, what decks you're kind of rocking. Every single comment does help the YouTube algorithm. I will stop yapping for now, but much love to everyone, and stay tuned for some more great content. We're going to do some tabletop content this week on the channel. So that's probably going to close out the rest of the week. There's also going to be a streaming a $1,000 store credit League Cup on Saturday. Probably not going to do any commentary or anything, but I do have my stream set up for that to help the store kind of broaden its reach and really show some of the great players in our Montreal area. Okay, that's enough yapping. Much love. Peace out. Have a great one. Want to support the Shuffle Squad? Be sure to check out all of our sponsors in the description to pick up Pokemon TCG singles, sealed, and PTCG live codes. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed the content that we have today, and maybe you'll click on one of these other videos, enjoy those videos too. If you haven't already, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what video you want to watch next. Until next time, we'll catch up with all y'all later. Have yourself a great day.